Alright, so in this video I want to explain how you can trick your brain into wanting to do difficult things that are boring, difficult, hard to concentrate on, hard to focus, things like studying, working out, exercising, working on your side business, working on yourself, whatever it is you're trying to do. Things that are typically difficult or hard to focus on because there's just so many other things you could be doing, so many other things you could be focusing on that there's just no motivation to do these things. And you often see these people who just seem to be able to do everything. They're productive, they can just get things done, they're motivated. Meanwhile, all you want to do really is play video games, scroll through Facebook, but there is a reason for that. There is a really powerful reason why that happens in your brain and why those things are easier. And if you reverse that, there's actually a simple trick you can do which will make it so much easier to do the cool things that will actually benefit you that you'll basically change your life. So let's just get right into it, okay? So firstly, your brain is a machine. There's a way of tricking it into do difficult things, just like you would program a software or a machine to do things that you want it to do, the desired outcome, okay? And this is a really powerful method, and I'm gonna share with you how in about 24 hours or less, about a day, you can reset your brain so that you will find it easy and fun to do those things that are typically not as fun or maybe even boring to you compared to the high dopamine activities like social media, scrolling through YouTube, eating junk food, and watching films or playing video games. So it's a really simple method which, if you understand it, it's going to change your life. It's going to be pretty simple and it's really quite fun to do as well. Firstly, dopamine is the key here. Dopamine is a reward neurotransmitter. And it's what's kept us alive for thousands of years. Basically, if we find food or we find shelter or whatever, we get a release of dopamine. Now, what's happened over years is we've developed to the point where our brains release dopamine from things that they're not necessarily going to benefit our survival. Things like scrolling through YouTube, checking your notifications, checking your likes on Facebook or Instagram, eating junk food. These things don't benefit us, but they release high levels of dopamine, meaning your brain craves more of these things. And so you get into this cycle where the high dopamine activities, scrolling through Facebook, the things that are bad for us, release the most dopamine, so our brains always want to do those things instead of the things that will actually benefit us. But there is a way of switching that around, and I'll share that in a minute. So, like I said, dopamine released when you do fun or highly engaging things, not necessarily good things. These might be bad things that are going to damage you and your health. Things like scrolling through social media, watching pornography, watching random videos on YouTube, video games, taking stimulants like coffee or even drugs. These are high dopamine reward. They're going to release high levels of dopamine in your brain, which is going to make you crave more of them. Okay, so as I said, the more you do these things, the more damaged your dopamine receptors become. So your brain actually starts to crave more and more of those things. You build up a tolerance and you need more and more of those things just to feel normal. And so what you have is that when you have these huge releases of dopamine from these things that are bad for us, it's no wonder that if you think about, reading for an hour, that sounds insane to you because you'd rather be doing these crazy fun things up here because you're used to that level of dopamine release. So your brain and body just don't want to do the thing that's not as fun as the high reward thing that you've been doing for so long. We're going to introduce what's called the dopamine fast. And I'm sure you've heard this idea before. I'm going to put a little twist on this and make it a bit more effective than most of the videos I've seen about the dopamine fast online. So what we're going to do is we're going to reset your dopamine receptors. In your brain, you have the dopamine where it's released, and then you have the receptor site, which is what receives and latches onto the dopamine and basically tells your brain, yes, we've received this dopamine. What happens over time is that as you overload your dopamine system, your receptor sites start to shut down. So you need more and more dopamine to actually send the signal to your brain that you're getting dopamine. What this means is that the more of this insane high level of dopamine that you have from unhealthy things, the less receptive your dopamine receptors are to the slightly less engaging things. The things that you could call boring, not as engaging or fun, but the things that will actually have a benefit. For example, reading, exercising, studying, meditating, working on your side business or your hustle, or even just learning something. These things are typically much more boring and they release much less dopamine than all of the other things we have available to us now on the internet. So This is going to allow your brain to actually enjoy doing the things that were boring to you before. Okay, it's a really powerful technique. So just to reiterate here, if you don't do this, if you don't sort this problem out, it's just going to spiral to the point where you never have any desire or motivation to do anything other than what releases the most dopamine. And this is seen most stereotypically in drug addicts, right? They don't have any desire to do anything. Studying, learning, socializing, they don't have any desire to do any of those things because they would always rather have that enormous release of dopamine from their drug of choice. And social media is the same. Pornography is the same. All of these things that release high levels of dopamine are bad for you in most cases. So you want to basically avoid doing those things. So here's what we're gonna get back to the dopamine fast now, okay? I just want to ask you a question. You probably don't have any problem with scrolling through social media for half an hour, 2 hours, watching YouTube videos for a couple of hours, playing video games, watching movies. You don't have any problem doing those things, and you don't find them hard or boring. And in many cases, you actually like and want to do those things for long periods of time. And in many cases, you don't even realize how long you're spending doing these things because time just flies away. You're having so much fun that you forget about how much time you're spending on these things, right? Now imagine if that was the case for learning something, or building a business, or meditating, or exercising. Okay, imagine if that was the case for those things. How different your life would be. How much you would accomplish in a year if you were as addicted to exercising as you are to Instagram, or you were as excited about reading or building a business as you were about watching Netflix. Imagine if you could switch that around so that you're more excited about the things that will actually benefit you. Your life will be insanely different in just 6 months' time. So here is how you do a dopamine reset. It's gonna suck, okay? I'll tell you right now, I've done this a few times actually over my life. Every time I feel like my dopamine receptors just need a reset and things, I'm having trouble focusing, I'll do this for a couple of days. And it's gonna suck, but here's how it works, okay? So what you wanna do, you want to avoid anything that will release dopamine for 2 to 3 days. Now, the sort of beginner version of this is 1 day, and I've seen a lot of videos where they say just do it for 24 hours. In my opinion, and in my experience, that's not enough. I think for the high levels of dopamine we've been used to, especially if you've been scrolling through things like TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, all of these highly engaging platforms, if you've been doing that for a long time, you need to reset in a much more powerful way. And so you need to do this for about 3 days. It's gonna suck, okay? I'm telling you right now. But for those 3 days, you want to avoid anything that releases dopamine. And I'm gonna explain what activities you need to avoid now. So I'm talking about no junk food, no masturbation, no scrolling through the internet unless you're learning something, but I would actually avoid that for 3 days. No social media, no using your phone, unless you absolutely need to make a phone call, but you probably don't, okay? It's very rare we actually have an emergency to deal with. No listening to music. Yeah, this is gonna get tough. No video games, no TV. The only things you are allowed to do for this 3 days, and of course this depends on, if you're working and stuff, but I figured lockdown is a good time to do this because you're not doing anything else, right? The only things you can do for this 3 days, meditate, write in a journal, not in a phone, I mean a physical notepad, right, old school, go for a walk in nature, think, and I guess you can eat food, right? But ideally, the ultimate version of this that I do is I actually don't eat food either. So I do a water fast. I only drink water for those 3 days. Because anything that you do that's going to release dopamine is going to sort of ruin this process, right? So it's going to suck. I'm just telling you for the 4th time. But it will reset your dopamine system. And I'm going to explain in a minute why that's so powerful. So for any of you who have seen the film Limitless with Bradley Cooper, now in that film, he's basically a failing writer. He's addicted to alcohol. He can't seem to focus, right? And in that case, his dopamine crutch, I guess you could say, is his drinking. He just can't think about anything. He can't focus because it's always more fun to drink and go to the bar and talk about what he's going to do, but not actually do anything. He switches that round when he takes this Limitless pill, which in this case, I'm going to compare the Limitless pill to the dopamine reset, okay? So he takes this reset pill, which makes it fun to do things that will benefit him. And so what you see is very quickly, he turns his life around by quickly learning how to trade stocks. He studies things for hours at a time. He sits at his desk and continues writing his book until it's done. Okay, and then he gets obviously book deals and opportunities coming in. He learns how to enjoy doing things that are beneficial to him, things that actually are going to make his life better. And you don't see him in the film scrolling through Instagram or playing video games, okay, or, you know, watching Netflix. You don't see him doing those things because they don't benefit him. What you see is he becomes addicted and so laser focused on doing things that will benefit him that it's not very long before he turns his life around and becomes really successful. Doesn't take that long. If that's all you're doing, if you're spending all your time trying to become successful and not watching Netflix and not doing any of that crap, you'll be very surprised how fast it happens because there's nothing else for you to do. So that's how the Limitless film works, okay? Now, it's gonna suck. I'm saying for the 5th time. It's worth it, okay? Because in many cases, we know what's good for us and we know what's bad for us. We know the things we should be doing to change our lives, okay? If you really think about it, you know that let's say if you want to increase your health, earn more money, have more freedom, you sort of know the things you need to do that. You know, you need to learn about finance, you need to ideally build a business or at least work on progressing the corporate ladder. And ultimately, you need to stop wasting your time watching Netflix or YouTube or Instagram. That's how you do it, right? Or let's say if you have fitness goals, you want to become really toned and have an 8-pack abs. The way you do that is by exercising more, eating healthier, and, you know, progressing in that way. So we sort of know what we should be doing, but we often don't do those things. This dopamine reset will change that process. It's going to sort of flip it on its head so that you then become addicted and motivated, I guess you could say, to do the things that will benefit you. And you'll be motivated to actually want to work on those things. So I hope this makes sense. Now, this is going to take at least a day. I would advise you to actually do this for three days, 72 hours. And during that time, yes, for most people, you're going to find it hard to not eat as well, especially with all of that other stuff. If you're not watching Instagram, you're not watching Netflix, no phones, no music even. So I guess 90% of you just do 1 to 3 days. And yes, you can eat, but try not to eat any junk food. And specifically, I'm talking about the dopamine releasing food. No sugar, no fatty foods, no fried foods, okay? Just healthy things. And trust me, this will make sense when you actually do this. So like I said, 3-day reset, that's enough time. Now, there's one warning I need to give you here, okay? And that is that if you're not careful, when this is over, when these 3 days are over, you need to be laser focused on what you want to achieve and you need to actually try and do it. That is the key thing here. And that first hour after this dopamine fast is over is the most important. If you end this and the first thing you do is pick up your phone and go on Instagram, you failed. Because what will happen is you'll enjoy the Instagram so much that you'll think, oh my God, this is what I've been missing. This is amazing. And you'll be scrolling through for 6 hours and you've wasted your time. You've ruined the reset, okay? So you need to make sure, and this is what is not talked about in other videos about this. The first thing you do when you end the fast needs to be something beneficial and productive. You need to focus on your goals, basically. So do the 3-day fast or the 1-day fast, whatever. The next day, the day you end the fast, only work on your goals for the first 10 hours of the day. And then after that, you can go back on Instagram and check your phone and whatever, okay? The first 10 hours are critical for this to work. And then going forward, you need to basically limit your activity with those high dopamine activities. You need to limit your use of Netflix and Instagram and crazy unnatural things like that are just going to overload your dopamine system basically and ruin your brain and ruin your productivity, and all of your goals go out the window. You need to limit your contact with those things as much as you can after this for it to actually work, okay? So I hope this has made sense. Now, there's a few different, ways you can go about doing this, but that is the idea in a nutshell. That's how you do it, okay? And I do this every time I need to increase my motivation. If I find I've not been productive, for a few days at a time or a few weeks at a time, very rare now, but if I have a bad week, I will usually do this. I will usually do this reset. It's powerful, okay? It's a powerful method. Most people don't have the balls to try it because they're, for whatever reason, addicted to those things that that release dopamine. And so most people will have this sort of hidden resistance to this idea. They'll think, oh, I don't need to do that. I can just, do it myself. I can manage this myself. I can just decide to use Instagram less and work on my goals more. And that's the reasoning of an addict. Okay, they will always say, I have it under control, or, I can decide to quit at any time. And it's not until they actually try to quit that they realize how addicted they are. So what I would encourage you to do is, even if you don't think you're addicted to dopamine and to social media and all of these things, just give this a try. I mean, what's one day? You're in lockdown anyway, right? You're not going out anyway. So what's the worst that can happen? Just give it a try. But then if you don't do this, here's what will happen. The dopamine system will rule your life. You'll become like a rat. And I don't mean this in a mean way, but I mean actually there was an experiment done on rats where they would give the rats two options. Okay, so one button would release dopamine. They attach electrodes to their brain. And the other button would give them food. And what they found is that the rats literally starved themselves instead of avoiding the dopamine. They would always rather have the dopamine than the food. And this is because we're simple. At our fundamental nature, we are simple machines. Our brains like to make things easier, avoid risk, and get reward. Very simple machines, right? But the problem is, with these super highly engaging things in the internet today, Netflix, Instagram, these platforms that are designed to keep you on them for as long as possible and release as much dopamine as possible. They don't tell you that though. They're designed to do that so that you become addicted to them, so that you watch more ads and make them more money. But most of us don't realize that, and so we become like the rat in the cage, where we just want to always have dopamine instead of the other option, whatever that other option is for you. So if you don't do this, here's what's going to happen, right? You're going to wake up in 40 years time, 30 years time, and you're going to realize that you've basically wasted your time in your life. For lack of a better way of explaining this, you've wasted your time. You haven't achieved the results you want. You haven't, built that dream life, done those things, had those experiences that you want. And instead you've just been scrolling through Facebook. You've been watching Netflix series. You've been binge watching on Amazon Prime series. You've been wasting your time, basically. You've not been doing things that will benefit you, so that in 30 years time, when it's time to look back on your life and see how things have gone, there's nothing to look back on. You've wasted the time that you could have been spending doing something great, whatever that is for you. So I really hope this makes sense. Give it a try, see how you get on. There's nothing really to lose here, and it's something that has such an incredible upside and almost no downside. The only thing that is bad about doing this or trying this out is that for one day or for 3 days, you might feel bored. You might feel miserable. You might feel like it's difficult or uncomfortable. That's the only downside to this. And then the upside, you change and rewire your brain to become addicted to success and to beneficial things. That leads to you building habits where you actually continue to do those things. That leads to results, and then that leads to your ultimate dream life. Everything you can possibly want to imagine is literally at the other side of this dopamine reset. But you just need to have the balls to try it out and actually stick with it for 3 days. If you can't do 3 days, do 1 day. 1 day is the minimum. Everyone can do 1 day. And if you can't, then you have to admit you're addicted to these social media platforms and you have a problem. So anyway, try it out for 3 days. I hope this works for you. I would love to hear your opinion in the comments. And leave a comment letting me know about what you would consider the highest dopamine releaser for you at the moment, and what your plan is, if you have one, what your plan is to avoid that or limit that. So leave a comment, and I'll see you next time.